Hi, I'm Kevin Tan, and today I will be discussing John C. Calhoun's introduction speech to his Resolutions on the Slave Question, February 19, 1847. John C. Calhoun's 1847 speech was delivered during a time of great sectionalism in the U.S. The issue of slavery was the main, if not greatest, cause of that division. At this time, abolitionism was a growing movement in the nation. With the rise of abolitionism also came even fiercer defenses of slavery from the South. In his speech, Calhoun, now a South Carolina senator, proved to be a strong sectional defender for Southern slaveholding interests during this time of deep sectional division in the country. Calhoun's speech as a whole was meant as a response to the Wilmot Proviso, which was a bill proposed by Pennsylvania Democrat David Wilmot in 1846. The Wilmot Proviso reflected the prevalent sectionalism present in 1840s America. Calhoun began his speech by referencing the provisions of the amendment. It would ban slavery in any new territory acquired by the United States, strongly favoring the non-slaveholding North. The amendment passed in the House, which had a Northern majority, but was still being discussed in the equally divided Senate. Calhoun stated that at present the number of free and slave states were equal at 14. But with the land that hadn't even been created into states yet, he projected that as a result of the Wilmot Proviso, there would be a total of 28 non-slaveholding states compared to a mere 14 slaveholding ones, without even counting the land that would be obtained from Mexico. This would cause a sharp disproportion of slaveholding versus non-slaveholding interests in the Senate, in addition to the already North majority, House of Representatives, and Electoral College. It would lead opinions to always swing in favor of the non-slaveholding states, which Calhoun knew would only negatively impact the interests of the South. Underneath the rather objective tone in which he was reciting the provisions, these paragraphs demonstrated Calhoun's underlying fear for the unequal situation the South would be put in with the Wilmot Proviso. While he did not say so directly, his words implied that he sought to compromise with his opponents in order to ameliorate that situation for the benefit of his own sectional interests. Calhoun stated that if the Wilmot Proviso passed in the Senate, we shall be at the complete mercy of the non-slaveholding states. This statement epitomized the country's sharp transformation from nationalism to sectionalism. With this declaration, Calhoun created an overt we-they division between the interests of the South and those of the non-slaveholding states, solidifying his position as a champion of Southern sectional interests. Calhoun considered the North as a completely separate entity that was oppressing the slaveholding interests of the Southern states. Furthermore, Calhoun's point echoed that of his protege, Robert Hayne, during the Nullification Crisis, which was another event that illustrated the great extent of sectionalism in the country. Hayne stated in Hayne Advocates Nullification, 1830, that submitting to the tariff of abominations would bring the states and people to the feet of the federal government. Like Hayne, Calhoun was painting a subservient picture of the South, appealing to the principles of equality that he knew his audience held as Americans. His statement, with his fearful tone, expressed to his audience that he was afraid of the inequality that would arise with the Wilmot Proviso. Yet it also had a hint of assertiveness, demonstrating his determination to mitigate this sharp inequality through a peaceful compromise with his sectional opponents that would concede to the interests of both sides, or else disunion would be a high possibility. Moreover, Calhoun aimed to sway his audience towards voting down the Wilmot Proviso by questioning their beliefs on equality. He asked his audience, which included President James K. Polk and non-slaveholding senators, "Now can that be consistent with equality, which will make this public domain a monopoly on one side, which in its consequences would place the whole power in one section of the Union to be wielded against the other sections? Is that equality?" Calhoun challenged his audience by stating that with the Wilmot Proviso, the nation would no longer be equal. Non-slaveholding states would have an overwhelming majority over slaveholding ones. He wanted his audience to know that equal representation in a republic was something that the United States had embraced for decades, but now the non-slaveholding states were undermining that principle. Under the surface, Calhoun was asserting that the Wilmot Proviso directly violated the deep-rooted American principle of equality that their fathers had fought hard for during the War for Independence. The inequality between slaveholding and non-slaveholding sections that would arise from the Wilmot Proviso was not what their founding fathers had envisioned when they were constructing the nation. Through this method of logical appeal, Calhoun attempted to persuade his audience to replace the Wilmot Proviso with a new compromise that would retain the present equality between the free and slave states, ultimately benefiting the South, as new states admitted to the Union would not be strictly non-slaveholding states anymore. Calhoun also brought in the Constitution to support his claims. He argued that the fact that a state's slave status was solely determined by the federal government went against the Constitution. He stated, "Sir, I hold it to be a fundamental principle of our political system that the people have a right to establish what government they may think proper for themselves, that every state about to become a member of this union has a right to form its government as it pleases, and that in order to be admitted, there is but one qualification, and that is that the government shall be republican. There is no express provision to that effect, but it results from that important section which guarantees to every state in this union a republican form of government." Calhoun asserted that it was up to the people of these newly created states, not the federal government, to vote on whether their state should be free or slaveholding. This was because, under a strict interpretation of the Constitution, every state is guaranteed a republican form of government where its citizens can establish laws that they feel are most beneficial to their state. This statement depicted Calhoun as a defender of state rights and liberties for all states in general. However, underneath the explicit intent of this assertion, which was to give the people of all new states the ability to vote whether their state should be free or slave, Calhoun was actually trying to specifically benefit the interests of the southern states. Under the provisions in his statement, the additional 14 states that Calhoun saw would be created wouldn't strictly be non-slaveholding states anymore from the Wilmot Proviso. The people of these new states could easily vote to allow slavery, thus increasing the power of the South. This showed that while Calhoun was a defender of state rights as a whole, he was much more of a sectionalist that worked in the best interest for specifically the southern states. Calhoun not only used the Constitution as a means of justification, but also as a unifying figure to persuade his audience for a new compromise. As a response to his claims about the unconstitutionality of the Wilmot Proviso, Calhoun said, "The resolutions that I intend to offer present these great truths. Overrule these principles, and we are nothing. Preserve them, and we will ever be a respectable portion of that union." With this statement, Calhoun was telling his sectional opponents that with his resolutions, he sought to preserve the union under the document that united them together as a nation. Calhoun didn't want this union. He was asserting that his resolutions were the only way national unity could be maintained while also conceding to each side's sectional interests. Voting down his resolutions would be violating the Constitution and the union that they had upheld for decades already. Here, Calhoun was attempting a unifying and logical approach to appeal his audience, not unlike George Washington during his farewell address. Calhoun used the prospects of unity that would result from his resolutions as a way to appeal to his audience emotions, convincing them to work with him for a compromise that would aid not only just the South, but both sides. Calhoun's 1847 speech was overall successful. The Wilmot Proviso was never passed in the Senate, and 3 years later, the North and South reached a compromise, known as the Compromise of 1850. The compromise admitted California as a free state, and New Mexico and Utah were organized as territories with no votes in Congress, maintaining the balance in the Senate. The most significant concession to the South that came with the compromise was the Fugitive Slave Act. This act established federal agents to help track runaway slaves and obligated authorities in the North to assist Southern slave catchers in returning runaway slaves to their owners. Thus, from here, it was evident that slavery would only continue to produce clear sectional divides between the North and South, with defenders of each side seeking to benefit the interests of their own sections, while at the same time also trying to preserve the union under which they all lived.